Hello, everyone. Welcome to Managing Facilities and Events in Sports, Entertainment, and Media Business. I'm your professor, Robert Romano, and I can be reached at my cell phone number, which is 203-777-9797, or you can reach me via email at my Columbia email address or my Iona email address. Beginning with Module 1, we're going to talk about history and future of sport and public assembly facilities. And as we begin, I want you to start thinking. I want you to start thinking about what do you think is the oldest sports facility in the world? All right. How long has it been around? Does your answer depend on how you define what is a sports facility? I mean, does it have to have seating? Does it have to have grass? Does it have to have a pitch? Does it have to have a dome? Does it have to be inside, outside? All that stuff. So, is seating required? Do you need seats in order to have a facility? Do you need a playing surface? What if the facility is only sometimes used for sport? Is that sport still a sports facility? I would say yes. What do you think is the most important sports facility at all time, and why? So take a minute, think about that. What do you think is the most important sports facility of all time? There's no right or wrong answer, but just think about why you think that. And what do you think would be the biggest challenges in running that facility? So let's say you pick, I don't know, Camp Nou in Barcelona as the most important sports facility, and then you get the job of running that facility. What would be some of those challenges in running such a big facility? The oldest sports facility, the Olympic Stadium in Greece. It was built in roughly 776 BC. It was initially a temple, but then they expanded it to include a gym, a training facility, a covered running track, not just a running track, a covered running track, and the famous stadium. And then, roughly 400 years later, they built the Olympic Stadium in Athens. That was around 331 BC, and even by today's standards, it was a large facility. It held 50,000 spectators. And interestingly enough, it was still around and was used to host the 1896 Olympic Games. All right, so that's the stadium, the way it was before it was fixed up. And this is what it looks like today. Very nice. Or maybe not today, but when they did the Olympics a few years ago. The Greeks also built hippodromes, horse racing tracks, and theaters. From Greece, we moved to Rome, and of course, the Romans built the Colosseum. They built the Circus Maximus, and they also built their version of hippodromes, horse racing tracks. The Colosseum, originally known as the Flavian Amphitheater, was built around 72 AD. That's when they started, and then they finished under Emperor Titus in 880 AD. And of course, being Romans, once they built something so large, they had 100 days of celebration. And beer, was it bread and circus? Yes, bread and circus. During this time, the gladiators fought. They killed beasts. They killed each other. I mean, just the way the Romans love to do stuff. The Circus Maximus was also built in Rome. Large facility used primarily as a horse racing track. It could seat at one time up to 300,000 people. It's a huge facility. It was destroyed 2 different times by fire. It collapsed a couple times, killing people. In today's day, we'd have a lot of lawsuits. Back then, you didn't sue the emperor. This is the Circus Maximus today. I actually took that picture. This is what it looks like. It's just a big empty field. But this is what it's alleged to have looked like back in the day. Let me go back to that so you can see. Nice facility. It had a long barrier or spine that ran down the middle. Fountains, statues, columns, temples, everything. All right, within that long barrier, that spine it down the middle. Romans knew how to do it. They also built many hippodromes throughout their empire. This is a picture of one built in Israel around 25 BC. Facilities began to decline around 400 AD. Sports and facilities began to decline around 400 AD. And can you think of why? What was happening during this period of time which would cause a decline in sport, which would cause a decline in sporting facilities, which kind of makes sense. Well, it was the rise of the Catholic Church. And with the influence and the rise of the Catholic Church, they frowned upon sport. They thought that, you should focus on God, on praying, that kind of stuff, instead of outside activities, sport. So they frowned upon sport. They frowned upon facilities. So during this period of time, everything started going into decline on it within sport, not within the Catholic Church. Not making any judgments. Now I want you to think about changing gears a little bit. What are some of the similarities that ancient facilities had as compared to modern facilities? Right? What are some things that are the same? Well, both have to control and move large number of people quickly and efficiently. All right, back then the Circus Maximus held 300,000 people. The Olympic Stadium held 50,000 people. You had to get people in it and out relatively quickly, and you had to manage them, making sure they weren't rowdy. If they got violent, how you handled it, similar to today. Um, and you also got to maintain flexibility, especially with multi-use venues. Back in the day in Rome, the gladiators may have fought in the Colosseum, but they also every once in a while flooded the Colosseum, and they had mock naval battles. Amazing. Today, we have multi-use venues, afternoons for basketball, evenings for ice hockey or ice shows, whatever it is. All right, so you got to think that back then they had multi-use. Today we have multi-use, different sports, but being able to convert a facility over. Some other similarities: you have to provide security and protection, especially for VIPs. You know, take care of petty crime that happen in large gatherings, and keep the facility clean and operational. Still need to keep a facility clean today and operational. Okay. Some differences. Now let's take a moment. Think. What could some differences be between ancient facilities and modern facilities? Well, nowadays we have amenities for press. All right, we got to allow the press to have their seat. They have to be able to report on the games. They need interview rooms. They need press boxes. They need internet access. We need to broadcast these games either on TV or stream it online. All right, so there needs to be set up for TV cameras and platforms for all that stuff. Today's day, we sell naming rights to facilities. Right, we have the MetLife Stadium down there in New Jersey to host for the Jets and the Giants. We don't have the Coca-Cola Coliseum in Rome. All right, now we have naming rights. We sell advertising space. They really didn't do that back in the day. Also, in modern facilities, you need to have setups for heating and air conditioning. Right? They didn't have electricity back then, so there was no need for this. But today, you want to be comfortable, you got to have your heating and air conditioning. Also, parking. We got cars, buses, vans, everybody coming to the games. They need a place to park. They need public transportation. Back in the day, there were no cars, no buses. All right, and we need to also feed 100,000 people at the venues. Not to say that they didn't feed the people back then, but we just have a lot more choices. Back then, bread and circus. Today we can get steak and wine, hot dogs, hamburger, get whatever you want at the various facilities, especially around New York. And today we got to worry about zoning laws, complying with environmental laws, zoning laws, accessibility, ADA, and other legal issues. Not so much back then. It was just the emperor said it, and it happened. All right, so moving into modern times, we got to start thinking about professional and collegiate facilities and how they came about and how they have changed over the last 120 years. All right, initially, in the early 1900s, college stadiums started being built across the United States. First one, Harvard, and of course, when Harvard builds one, Yale has to build one. And then professional stadiums started being built roughly about the same time. The early versions were made of wood. Once they burned down, they decided, well, you know what? Maybe we should make these of steel and concrete. Make them a little bit more sturdy for the fans so that they don't burn down, they don't collapse, that kind of stuff. Initially, in what we call the early years, 1900 through 1940, Major League franchises, the teams, they paid for their own facilities. If it was their team, they had to have somewhere for them to play. They paid for that stadium. A couple exceptions: the LA Coliseum, Chicago Soldier Field in Chicago, and the Cleveland Municipal Stadium. And this was because they were built for the common good. The LA Coliseum was built for the Olympics, and Soldier Field was built for the World's Fair. All right, so they felt it was for the public good, the common good. So let's build these for everyone to host the games. So and the municipalities, the states, the taxpayers paid for them. But initially, if you owned a franchise, you built and paid for your own stadium. This changed in what they called the gestation era, which was 1950 to 1970. All right. During this period of time, governments would finance and construct sports facilities. The governments then would become the landlords, and the professional sports franchises would become the tenants. And I want you to think why? Why did this change? Why did all of a sudden um, owners went from not building their own stadiums, not paying for their own stadiums, to having it, pushing it onto the government, and then just leasing it back? Well, during this period of time, we just got out of the Great Depression and World War II. Right, so the teams really didn't have much money. The resources of the leagues and teams were drained. Not a lot of people were going to the games during the Depression. Not a lot of people going to the games during World War II. So the teams weren't making a lot of money. So the government decided to step in and help them. Also during this period of time, land prices rose rapidly because everybody coming back from the war. You got all these people, of course, supply demand. Land prices go up, and land parcels within the inner cities became rare and rare. Okay, and as we got more and more cars, parking became more scarce. So all these factors, especially the fact coming out of World War II, out of the Great Depression, it drained the resources of the leagues. The municipalities decided to step in and pay for the stadiums. And this continued on through the public subsidy era, which, 70s, mid 80s, funded. This is when the owners got really greedy. They perceived it to be the exclusive responsibility of public entities. All right, and during this period of time, it was the most active period of expansion and relocation of teams. So governments in the West, governments in the South would say, hey, well, Brooklyn Dodgers, come play out in California. We'll build you a stadium. We'll even give you a bunch of land, right? So other cities and towns, especially in the West, especially in the South, wanted major league teams in their city, so they enticed them by paying for their facilities, paying for the land around the facilities, so the owners could make money. All right. During this period of time, governments paid approximately 93% of the cost. Not a bad deal for the owner. I mean, if you're gonna buy a house, and somebody said, "Well, I'll pay for 93% of it," I think you'll take it. All right. The transition period was after this. This was more of a public-private partnership. This is in late 80s, early 90s. The government started having a diminishing role in the building of facilities. And this was due to, the depression, the high deficit, the recession we went through in the late 80s, tax reform under Reagan. I mean, so the government said, no. We don't have any money. We're gonna stop paying for these facilities. And then it was also at this time it was found that the facilities were able to generate their own revenue. And we're going to get into that during this course, how facilities generate their own revenue. But at this period of time, it started becoming known that, wait, we don't need to pay for your stadium. You can build your own stadium and generate revenue from it to pay for it. All right, and that's what led into the transition period. All right, this is where public-private partnerships, joint ventures. All right, this is where the governments and the franchise owners work together to build stadiums. American West, Jacobs Field, Target Center, these are all examples of that. During this period of time, huge amount of stadiums were built, 43 new major sports facilities within roughly 8-9 years. Most, again, publicly, privately financed, joint partnerships. All right, now we got this fully loaded era. Also, we got in. Why it became more of a split was because taxpayers were unwilling to finance. But a good example, St. Louis, they had the Rams, they lost the Rams because they wouldn't pay for the stadium. Okay, taxpayers are starting to smarten up. Go, hey, you're a $1 billion business. You pay for your own stadium. And also, the fact that, like I said, revenue, facilities, arenas could just start generating their own revenue. And we're going to discuss how as we go through this course. All right. Well, this is Module 1, Part 1. Thank you for your time. If you have any questions, please forward them to me. Call, text, whatever you need to do.